Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Comedian MTG. My name is Ian. Now, in today's episode, we are actually going to do something we don't usually do on the channel, which is we're going to go back a little bit and cover the top 16 of a recent tournament. I missed this week because I was traveling from Magic Con Philly, and we are covering the top 16 of the Chaos Tournament's first ever treasure event. Basically, it's very similar to a lot of the Chaos tournaments online that we've seen before, but these ones actually involved a monetary buy-in. So it's basically their version of a more upscale tournament. And I know they're like alternating between these and the regular free tournaments from this point onward. So it's really cool. Wanted to cover the top 16 because there were some really cool decks in there. And it's actually one of the most like commented things on a video recently was just people asking for this to be covered. And usually people don't like go back in time and ask for me to cover different events that have already happened and sort of been in the past. So I figured this would be a great thing to cover. And also by the time this video comes out, it's only a couple weeks old, if that. So it's not like we're going super back in time to cover these results. So it's still a very relevant tournament and very relevant tournament results and some really cool decks. So let's just get into them. While we're here on YouTube, make sure to hit like and subscribe. It helps out the channel a ton and helps with all of those things, help the algorithm, helps us out here. And make sure to leave a comment below if you have any opinions on these decks. I'd love to hear people's feedback, love to hear people's reactions to these really cool decks that are in our format right now. So let's break it all down now. So this is number 16, the Doom of Possibilities. And this is a really cool deck. It reminds me, or it has like aspects of the very recent performance by the Rograk Tevesh deck, of that stacks variant. This is an Akiri Tevesh deck. So instead of Rakdos, we're going into the Mardu colors, but having a lot of the same stuff, having Karn and Chandra, which once again, were very clearly like staples of that Rograk Tevesh deck. But you get white, which gives you things like Sarah Ascendant, some way better stacks pieces, things like Aethersworn Canonist, Eidolon of Rhetoric, Aven Mindsense, or Archon of Emeria. So you have all these really powerful stacks effects. Then you get access to Academy Rector. What's really cool about this is that you have your commander Tevesh to be able to sacrifice your Academy Rector in the command zone, and then it'll bring out Possibility Storm. Now, the Rograk Tevesh deck was already kind of just trying to win with the Tevesh Ultimate. So this version is trying to get this Rector to pop out a Possibility Storm. And also there's options for like Rule of Law and Smothering Tithe and Blind Obedience and Roiling Vortex, which I think is a very spicy card. Not one that I was expecting, but it does say whenever a player casts a spell, if no mana was spent to cast it, it does deal 5 to that player, which does put a clock on certain pieces, like no more fast mana, no more free counter spells, things like that. And unlike Lavinia, you still can cast these things, but it just deals you a certain amount of damage. So this deck really is like this stacksy mid-range deck, and it's really, really interesting. It also has Godo as a win con in the deck, which is super, super cool. Love to see a spicy win con like that in this list. Then playing some really insane top end stuff like Sire of Insanity, which goes really well with Tevesh because Tevesh allows you to really regain your card advantage fast. Atlas Norin, obviously a huge closer, especially in a stacksier deck. So this deck's really, really cool, really unique, and I'm really excited to see it in this tournament. Yeah, and I like the addition of white. I literally was thinking about adding white to that Rograk Tevesh deck a few days ago. So it's very funny to see that someone actually just executed this theory and created this like very fast Mardu stacks deck that does a lot of really cool stuff. And it's cool also that like Rog gives you a little more speed than Akiri does, but Akiri also is just like a clock in the command zone. Like you have things like Dockside to give you artifacts, but you are without your creature artifacts, you're playing 18 artifacts on their own. So like definitely a real amount of pressure Akiri can start to provide in the command zone to just kill your opponents and get them dead. So it's very, very cool to see this deck played, and super spicy way to start off this top 16. We are over here with a Krark Sakashima list. As people know, I am not a huge Krark Sakashima person, so I'm not gonna be able to tell you if there's anything super insane in this list, but going over it, I really don't see too many things that I would consider innovations. We have our classic enchantments here, we have a Krark's Thumb in the artifact list, a lot of fast mana there, some cantrips, things like that, a lot of storm pieces, so nothing super spicy that I really see that I think, that's not normally a Krark Sakashima card. One card that's worth mentioning that's being picked up a lot lately is Rending Volley. It's really good against things like Drained Magistrate and Winota specifically, very good at taking those pieces out, so very strong card there. It also kills Malcolm uncounterably if someone's going for a Malcolm Glinthorn combo, so Rending Volley's been picking up a bit of steam, especially as an anti-Winota tech piece, so very cool card, can't be countered, and hits a good amount of pieces in the format. Tayam Luminous Enigma, a Tuca run top 16ing with this deck. And I know I just talked about Tuca performing well with Tayam before. Tyvar clearly being a very good upgrade for this deck. And Tayam really paying off my comments in our 3-color breakdown video where I said this deck was underplayed and it can start doing pretty good things. So seeing two top 16s back to back is really cool. I really love this deck. It's so unique. It's so weird. It just does the counter thing. You know, get to a point where you can create your infinite counter loops with things like Devoted Druid, and then you basically mill your entire library over, being able to recur your pieces over and over again. Meanwhile, being this extremely resilient stacks deck that really does not allow your opponents too much space to get around it. It plays a bunch of super unique cards, and I would love to maybe have a TIM expert on this channel so they can really break it down, because I think it's a really unique deck that does not get enough love, and it does a lot of really cool stuff, like playing one of my favorite cards of all time, Triangle of War, which I didn't know anyone even like knew about, Nevertheless was going to play in a cEDH deck. Just a lot of really cool stuff here and a lot of really unique cards, and I think I will definitely make it a priority in the near future to get a TIM pilot on, because I really like TIM and I would love to have an expert like break down this deck and the way it's played. Keeping up the spice and top 16 performance by Safi Eriksdotter. Now I know there have been some people in the community trying to make Safi a thing for a good amount of time, and I believe Nilstan is one of those people. And basically the idea with Safi is like you can do a lot of these like infinite recursion combos, things with Revelark and Karmic Guide and stuff like that, and then you can just sort of recur your permanents over and over again and create infinite loops. Now I know with certain sack outlets here, like Altar of Dementia specifically, and Blasting Station, and Phyrexian Altar, you'll be able to end in loops where you make infinite mana. Blasting Station allows you to do infinite damage. Altar of Dementia allows you to mill your opponents out. So there's a bunch of different ways where you can loop your stuff over and over again and infinitely loop your deck. And it's got a lot of these really resilient like creature combos, but also it's a little weird because you can't play your collector oofs, right, being in green, but you can also play your rule of law effects. You can play your Archon, your Aether Sworn, your Eidolon of Rhetoric, because your combo does not actually involve that many needing to be cast pieces. What it does need is things to be assembled on the battlefield over and over again. And I'm not an expert on this list by any means, but you can clearly see some of these pieces at work. So for example, you could have Safi and Sun Titan, recurring each other infinitely, things like that. Renegade Rallier, I believe, does the exact same thing. So there's a lot of pieces in this list that just sort of allow you to continue these loops and get them going over and over again. A lot of redundancy, which is probably how this deck was able to perform. One, a bit of a surprise factor, right? It's not a deck people expect to see in a cEDH setting, but also, as I mentioned, the layered redundancy in the command zone, being able to assemble these pieces very easily because they sort of layer on top of one another. So cool to see this list. Love seeing all these spicy decks in the top 16. It seems like a very unique top 16 so far. Number 12, we have Ka0s here, which is not one I usually associate with the performing ad nauseum decks in the format. I've noticed a lot of people have gone into the sans green category, so having this green based ad nauseum deck is pretty cool. It gives you access to these like really consistent mana dork, gets you access to Calling Ritual, which is obviously a very strong card. Crop rotation is there. I wonder if there's Boseiju maybe for the crop rotation. This Boseiju exists, or I guess Emergent Zone as well, but I know a lot of people have played the other Boseiju in these lists, so you can have an uncounterable ad nauseum after your crop rotation, but I guess that's not part of this list. And the cool thing about like the Icron variant is like you get sort of this like mid-range plan as well. You get to play your Sylvan Libraries and things like that, and you have your Necropotents. It's definitely sort of a stranger balance of things. You're playing some of these green cards that allow you to have a little more game into the later game, but you lose out on things like Timna and the command zone. You lose out on, you know, silence effects and Ranger Captain and Grand Abolisher, but you gain a few pieces here and there like Veil of Summer and stuff like that. So it's an interesting list here. Nothing too insane, just a 4-color turbo ad nauseum deck, playing a few mid-range pieces, playing a few faster pieces, just trying to, you know, do the turbo Naz thing and win the game. Very cool to see a Shorakai list here in the top 16. Shorakai is a deck that has notoriously not performed well despite being very popular when it first first came out, this is one of the lists running Humility. Humility is an insanely powerful card, and if you can break parity on it, then Humility is just so incredibly powerful. You can play crazy cards like Out of Time, things like that, dress down to hate on creatures. Now you only have one creature in the deck, and that is a Hullbreaker Horror, which allows you to, when you cast a polymorph, turn one of your pilots that you make off Shorokai into a Hullbreaker, and then if you get to a scenario where you can make infinite mana of blue and white, you can basically bounce your Shorokai, replay it, activate it, and then you'll be able to have infinite mana, draw your whole deck, and then be able to go off from there. Very cool to see this list do well. Obviously, it's really good against the creature strategies in the format, right? Because you get to play your cards like Humility, you get to play your board wipes, you get to play your Out of Time, all of these things. And then you get to play a lot of really unique blue-white stuff. Crazy to see things like Misdirection and Commandeer for the free interaction in this deck. Clearly a deck that is focused on, having free interaction when they want it, and it has a lot of it. But ironically, no Mind Break Trap. I would definitely play that over something like a Commandeer any day. But, interested to hear the pilot's thought on that. And then crazy stuff in the artifacts. You can play your Torpor Orbs to shut down other ETB effects, which is really good because Dockside is a giant pain when you're playing an artifact commander and 26 artifacts in your deck. Definitely good to have a Torpor Orb there to not feed Docksides. And Unwinding Clock, really good at basically turning your artifacts into a Seedborn Muse without green. So Unwinding Clock is very, very strong, and also untaps your Shorokai itself. So yeah, very, very strong with this archetype. And this deck also can win with Isochron Scepter, Dramatic Reversal, which is the only win con that actually wins through Humility, which is something worth noting if you're going to pick up this deck, is that if something happens to your Isochron Scepter, your own Humility actually stops you from winning the game, which is not great. Humility also just absolutely destroys your opponents in the other circumstances, so it's probably still pretty worth it. It's really cool to see Shorokai do well. It's a deck that I was a really big fan of at the start of the Kamigawa set, and I'm really glad to see it do well here. This is 2 performances in a row by this Christopher K. Claw Atraxa Grand Unifier list. I broke this down in my last video, so I won't talk too long about it, but basically you're trying to do the infinite food chain stuff in the Sans Red color combination. You get access to 4 colors worth of really good cards, right? You get to play all the cards you would normally play in a Tymna Thrasios, plus have Food Chain as a win con. You get to play your Culling Ritual, your Mnemonic Betrayal. This deck is definitely has some more mid-rangey pieces, but also is looking to push some faster wins here. I love that it has Displacer Kitten, because Displacer Kitten is so insane with Atraxa. Now it's 11 mana to assemble all of these pieces, but it's a very, very effective combination when you get it in. And then you also have Thassa's Oracle, Demonic Consultation. To be honest, this deck looks really, really fun, and I'm definitely interested in playing it. Now, I know there's definitely arguments what's better, to have Food Chain in the 99 or to just play a deck that tries to cheat Atraxa into the battlefield in a Tymna Thrasios deck, right? And there are definitely arguments for each side, but the fact that there's even an argument for this strategy, pretty cool. And this deck is definitely really unique. I'd love to see a new commander sort of come out of the gate strong, and a 7 mana commander in cEDH seeing play. So it's really, really cool. This is We Don't Need Oracle, and it's pretty much just Dawnmaker Thrasios, if not exactly Dawnmaker Thrasios. And happy to see a list that I love, my favorite deck in this format, performing well. This looks like literally the only change is that this person hasn't taken out Red Blast for March of Swirling Wisps, so this looks to be almost my exact list that I took to Oktoberfest, which is really cool. I love the deck. I love seeing it perform well. I love seeing people perform well on the deck. Yeah, happy to see Dawnmakers do well. We have, this deck is called Shorokai Players Pissing Their Pants, this is an interesting combination because it's playing these Planeswalkers, but and Prophet Distortion, things like that, but it's also playing this higher end stuff, very similar to Hire's list on the database right now, with playing the Thorn Mammoth and the 7-man Jin-Gitaxias, Coma, stuff like that. Very cool to see this very heavy top end deck doing its thing. Just a big flip Kinnan deck, also looking to make infinite mana with Basalt Monolith and draw the entire deck using Mirage Mirror. Witness Protection, definitely a spicy option that I was not expecting in this deck, but it is just a 1 mana removal spell that has the potential to permanently remove a very problematic threat. This list is also playing Thorn of Amethyst, which I know a lot of other Kinnan lists are shifting to. Some of them are even going as crazy as playing Trinisphere in the 3 mana slot. But this one's definitely playing a little more free interaction too, playing Force of Vigor, Mind Break Trap, Force of Will, Fierce, Force of Negation. So cool deck. Oh, I'm interested to see why they're on Muddle but they're not on Isochron Scepter or anything like that. So I'm wondering what 2-drop specifically they're trying to tutor with Muddle. I guess they have Thrasios, the Gilded Drake, Thassa's Oracle. Yeah, also playing Thassa's Oracle. It's very interesting. But this is mostly just a big flip Kinnan list, and as I mentioned, the 2-mana tutor there with Muddle is a very interesting concept to me. Maybe they just think it's a flexible enough counterspell that gives you options, which is pretty cool. I mean, it is definitely that. I like to see Kinnan doing well, especially after I just took it to a top 16 performance. It's a really fun deck, and I like seeing it do well. We have the Punching Princess by Captain Nap. This is a Najeela list, playing some more mid-range pieces, things like Miri and Shatterfang. Definitely a more mid-range slanted Najeela. Back on Nature's Will, as a lot of Najeela lists are on nowadays. But this one's still on Underworld Breach, still on Ad Nauseam and Culling Ritual and things like that. So this is sort of like a hybrid of some of these more Najeela mid-range decks and the more explosive Turbo Nas Najeela decks that have been running around. And I'm not used to seeing this like sort of halfway in the middle thing. Very interesting to see this split in Najeela to, as I mentioned, like find this halfway ground between this new emerging faster Najeela and also the more slow, grindy mid-range decks that exist currently in the format. Congrats on the performance. Now here we have a Malcolm Vile Smasher by Jay Pizzle. Very cool. It's, Malcolm Vile Smasher doing the classic Glinthorn combos, and then the rest of the deck is just kind of doing the Turbo Nas thing, playing a bunch of wheels, playing Ad Nauseam, playing Peer into the Abyss, trying to go off with Underworld Breach. It has a little bit of animate deadlines, I believe, because they're playing Intuition, right? So if you Intuition for Breach and Reanimate or Animate Dead and Glenhorn Buccaneer, basically you can assemble any sort of combo with that, right? So the idea is that you would play Intuition, grab like Reanimate and Animate Dead, and then Glenhorn Buccaneer, and that way no matter what they give you, Glenhorn Buccaneer is the most expensive version at 1 red, but then you can either cast Reanimate or Animate Dead to be able to grab your Glenhorn the next turn and win with there. So really cool deck. I love seeing Malcolm Vile Smasher do well. It's one of my favorite combinations, and a deck that I was playing for a little while, was really hyped on, and then sort of fell out of love with it a little bit. But this one's definitely a more, as I mentioned, turbo ad nauseum focused build, and cool to see it do well here. We have Bloodless Pod by Lisby. Bloodless Pod having another top performance here by Lisby in this deck, doing the stuff we talked about when we featured it previously. Cool inclusions in this version, playing cards like Jetmir as just like an endgame finisher, which is like one of my biggest qualms with Bloodpod in the past, is that it hasn't been playing enough cards like Jetmir. It hasn't been playing enough finishers that just turn the corner and close the game. So I really like seeing that. I like seeing that they're on Mayhem Devil Dockside combos, and I like seeing that they're on Linvala and Elishnorn and pieces like Shalai. All these pieces that like really just close the game out. And I think that's something that Bloodpod's been lacking historically, is just a way to really turn the corner and just absolutely put the nail in the coffin of the opponents, and it usually lets the opponents have too much leeway. But it's really cool to see Bloodpod in the hands of Lisby consistently performing at a much higher level. So that's really awesome, and congratulations, Lisby. Now to our top 4. We have Blue Farm. That's, it's another Blue Farm deck. It's okay. For anyone who doesn't know, Blue Farm is trying to do the Underworld Breach thing. They're trying to use Ad Nauseam to be able to draw much cards. Blue Farm is a mid-range variant of this strategy. It's not as turbo as something like a Rograk Silas, but it's playing cards like Lavinia to bring it into the mid game. Douthie Voidwalker, same thing. So definitely has some more, card advantage pieces, but also playing some of the best win conditions in our format, being Thassa's Oracle Demonic Consultation, Ad Nauseam to draw large portions of your deck, playing Underworld Breach. Classic Blue Farm stuff. Nothing really too crazy to say about this deck. It is a tried and true formula. Blue Farm is a very solid deck, and congrats to TK for hitting the top 4 with this deck. I don't know why this deck is called I Spilt Fanta on my deck, but it's pretty funny. This is Yuriko, and Yuriko traditionally has actually struggled to put up top results. It's been one of those decks that's like super popular in the format. A lot of people really, really love it, and it just hasn't actually done anything for a long time. And it's really cool. So this is one of the stacks variants, playing things like Null Rod, Grafdigger's Cage, Chalice of the Void, playing very few artifacts with just enough to really accelerate your early game plan and get your early ninjas and Yuriko out. Yuriko really does a good job at breaking parity with Null Rod, and then playing sort of these mid-range options and a bunch of stuff that like can really hurt your opponent when flipped off the top. Consigned to Oblivion, hitting them for 7, Commandeer, hitting them for 7, 5, 5, 4, 4, 4, right? A lot of big instance things like Seagate Restoration doing the same thing. Crippling Fear, which is like one of the best cards that Yuriko has access to, and as a Winota pilot, it's like one of the things I'm always afraid Yuriko is going to pull out of nowhere. Gets to play really cool cards like Shadow of Mortality, just as like the I'm going to do 15 damage to everybody, hope that they're not going to die to this one thing. And then a lot of the really cool ninjas that we got to see in Kamigawa Neon Dynasty and haven't really seen perform. So I'm really happy to see that, because when that set first came out, I was really hyped on the ninjas and hoping that they would do better than they have done up to this point. So it's really cool to see that. Cool piece, Surprise and Legate here is if your opponent controls a mountain, you control an island, you can play for free. So it's just a free 1/3 flyer in a good amount of games. You can't always guarantee your opponents have mountains, but there's a chance that, you know, most pods will have a mountain in them. So it's kind of cool to see that card. Apart from that, it's just a tempo Yuriko deck trying to either win with Consultation or win by dealing your opponents a finite amount of damage with Yuriko through combat damage and through Yuriko's triggers, and the just pure amount of ninjas that are just actually in this deck, which is really cool. There's a lot of them. There's 10 separate ninjas in this deck, not including your commander. So there's a lot of different ways to trigger Yuriko. And congrats to this pilot, because as I mentioned, Yuriko is a list that has really struggled lately to actually put up results, and very cool to see it perform here. Speaking of our earlier Shorikai, we have a Shorikai also in the top 4. So not only has Shorikai not put up a result to this point that has been really worth mentioning, but now we have a top 16 and a top 4 performance within the same tournament. Now this one's really interesting because this Shorikai list is actually not going with the polymorph plan. They're playing Dranith, Aethersworn, Grand Abolisher, Oswald, Soulless Jailer, Thoracle, Archon, and Aven Mind Sensor. So they're playing a bunch of creatures in this deck. Not a ridiculous amount, but definitely a finite amount of them. This list is still playing Humility despite the fact that they are playing creatures. Mirror Fate's a very interesting choice here. I'm not really sure why that is in the list, but I would definitely be curious to find out. Maybe due to the fact that you're playing your own Rest in Peace and have your Shorikai being able to dump things into the graveyard. So for me, it looks like this list only can win with Isochron Scepter, which is very interesting to me, and what I would consider pretty greedy, because it is hard to guarantee you win with only a single win con. So I'm very surprised by that. But I guess Mirror Fate helps in scenarios which you actually get your Isochron Scepter or Dramatic Reversal exiled. So I guess Mirror Fate is sort of your backup plan to cover for that eventuality. But then also you exile all the cards from your library. So that's even more wild, because then you have to like have a win an Isochron Scepter outlet in your exile to replace your library. Weird. It's definitely a weird thing, but if you have like a Blind Obedience or something like that on the battlefield, then you can just win the game that way. I don't know if that exactly like solves the problem, but I'm as I mentioned, genuinely surprised to see this list be able to perform so well with only a single win con in the deck, but it was able to make it all the way to the top 4 of this tournament, which is really cool. Congrats on a deep run with Shorikai, which is not a deck that is traditionally, as I mentioned, like looked upon with favor. Really cool. And now we have this list by Sharky. The Armix is mid, but so is the range. This is multiple top performances by this deck. I believe there's a top 16, a top 4, and now winning the entire first Ka0s Treasure tournament with this Tevesh Crom mid-range ad nauseum list, right? Trying to leverage the fact that they're on Displacer Kitten, get to play Notion Thief in this deck and a couple wheels, but the idea being that Displacer Kitten is kind of cracked with Tevesh, and then you also get to sort of just play this ad nauseum mid-range game plan, and with these 2 5-mana card advantage engines in the command zone, you get to generate a ton of advantage and get your opponents dead really quickly, playing ad nauseum to really close the corner in this game. Very impressive run by this deck, and very impressive run by Sharky, being able to put up back-to-back performances with this deck. I don't know if they participated in the Mox Masters event a couple weeks ago, but if they didn't, that still means they're on a hot streak, and if they did, that means it's 1 tournament out of 4 that they didn't take down, which is kind of crazy, or didn't at least make the top cut for. So really consistent performances from this deck, and definitely a player to look out for. A Sharky playing this deck on Crom Tevesh mid-range, being able to consistently keep winning, which is really cool. channel. All right, everybody, thank you for joining me for this episode. If you like videos like this, make sure to hit like and subscribe. And if you really like stuff like this, make sure to go to patreon.com/comedianmtg. Any help helps the channel a ton. We have things like our coaching tier, which are being revamped at the end of this month. We have things like your name in the show notes and so many other benefits that you can check over at patreon.com/comedianmtg. We also are affiliated with Dragonshield. They make amazing sleeves. It is the sleeves I use for all of my cEDH decks. So huge shout out to Dragonshield. And if you want, there is an affiliate link down in the description below where you can check that out. So buy some Dragonshield product and help out the channel a ton. Also, we are now an ambassador for Monarch Media. So Monarch is re-upping their whole tournament scene. They've got a bunch of events coming in the near future. So keep an eye out for that. And as we have more details and more specifics, I will be happily talking about those things on this channel. All right, everybody, without any further ado, we're going to head out for the day. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll catch you next time. Peace.
I can feel the blood creeping up from the heathens. Got will, got fight, got pride, got reason. If they wanna go eat, then you know I'm gonna feed them. If you're coming for me, hope you're ready for a demon. I got eyes in the back of my head, I'm seeing. Take me for granted and you know I'm leaving. I'ma take what's mine with the webs I'm weaving. I could take this crowd from seeing to